The gunshot echoed across the dusty main street of Silver Creek, causing Sophia Adams to drop her basket of freshly purchased supplies. It wasn't the sound that frightened her, it was what it represented. Another payment her father had failed to make, another excuse that wouldn't satisfy the most dangerous man in the territory. Sheriff Tate had warned them just last week. Either pay what's owed or face the consequences. Now, as the spring of 1876 bloomed around her, Sophia realized those consequences had finally arrived. Dust swirled around Sophia's worn boots as she gathered her scattered belongings, her honey-blonde hair falling from its careful arrangement. At 22, she had spent the past 4 years since her mother's death trying to keep their small ranch afloat, while her father drowned his sorrows in whiskey and gambling debts. The bank had been patient, but Silas Morgan, owner of the Silver Creek Saloon and half the businesses in town, was not known for his mercy. The pounding of hooves made her look up as a rider approached, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. William Zachary pulled his chestnut stallion to a stop beside her, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the dirt street. "Miss Adams," he said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of a man who'd spent too many years under the Texas sun. "You might want to head home. There's trouble brewing." Sophia clutched her basket tighter. "What kind of trouble, Mr. Zachary?" Will's jaw tightened beneath his neatly trimmed beard. At 28, he was already making a name for himself as one of the territory's most successful cattle ranchers. His reputation as a fair but formidable man had earned him respect from most except perhaps Silas Morgan, whose offers to buy Will's prime grazing land had been repeatedly refused. "Morgan's men are looking for your father. Something about a final notice." His deep blue eyes softened. "I heard them talking at the saloon. It doesn't sound good, Miss Adams." Fear clutched at Sophia's heart. "I need to get home," she whispered, gathering her skirts to run. Will extended a hand. "Let me take you, it'll be faster." Sophia hesitated only a moment before accepting his help, settling behind him on the saddle. The ride to her family's small ranch passed in tense silence, broken only by the rhythmic pounding of hooves and Sophia's quiet prayers that they weren't too late. They weren't, but what awaited them was worse than Sophia had imagined. 3 men on horseback surrounded her father, who knelt in the dirt outside their modest cabin. His face was bloodied, his expression one of defeated resignation. "Papa!" Sophia cried, sliding from Will's horse before he could stop her. One of the men, Sophia recognized him as Morgan's right-hand man. Fletcher turned with a cold smile. "Well, look who's arrived. Perfect timing, Miss Adams. Your father has something to tell you." Thomas Adams raised his head, shame written across his weathered features. "Sophia, I'm sorry. I've made a terrible mistake." Fletcher dismounted, pulling a document from his jacket. "Your father owes Mr. Morgan $5,000. A debt that's grown considerably with interest over the past year." "5,000," Sophia gasped. Their entire ranch wasn't worth that much. There must be some mistake. "No mistake, miss," Fletcher said, waving the paper. "It's all here in black and white, your father's signature on every loan." Will dismounted, his presence commanding attention as he stepped forward. "Let me see that paper," he demanded. Fletcher smirked but handed it over. Will scanned the document, his expression darkening. "These interest rates are criminal, even for Morgan." "The law says different," Fletcher replied, "and Mr. Morgan wants his money today." Thomas Adams staggered to his feet. "I don't have it. You know I don't have it." Fletcher nodded to his men. "Then Mr. Morgan will take what's owed another way." His cold eyes turned to Sophia. "Your daughter will fetch a good price down in Mexico. Enough to cover the debt, I reckon." "No." Thomas lunged forward but was quickly subdued by one of Morgan's men. Sophia felt the blood drain from her face as the meaning of Fletcher's words became clear. Sold, like cattle. For a debt she didn't even know existed, Will stepped between Sophia and Fletcher. This is madness. You can't sell a person to cover a debt. In these parts, Mr. Zachary, people pay what they owe one way or another. Fletcher's hand moved to his holster. This isn't your concern. I'm making it my concern, Will replied, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of steel. How about another solution? I'll pay the debt, Fletcher laughed. $5,000, right now. Give me 3 days, Will countered. I'll have the money. Mr. Morgan doesn't give extensions. Then take me instead, Will said, the words falling into a sudden silence. I'll work off the debt, my life for hers. Sophia gasped. Mr. Zachary, no, you can't. 3 days, Fletcher interrupted, eyeing Will speculatively. Mr. Morgan might find that arrangement interesting. He's always wanted your land. The money, Will corrected firmly. Not my land. 3 days to get $5,000. Fletcher considered this for a long moment before nodding. 3 days. But the girl comes with us as insurance. You bring the money to Morgan's office by sunset on the 3rd day, or she goes to Mexico and you'll answer to Morgan personally. I'll be there, Will promised. He turned to Sophia, whose wide eyes reflected her terror. Don't worry, Miss Adams. I won't let them harm you. As Morgan's men prepared to take her away, Sophia whispered, Why would you do this for me? You barely know me. Will's eyes held hers. Because it's the right thing to do. But as they led Sophia to a waiting wagon, she wondered if there was more to Will Zachary's intervention than simple decency, and why her heart raced at the thought. The room above Silver Creek Saloon was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and chair as its only furnishings. A heavy lock on the outside of the door reminded Sophia of her status not a guest, but a prisoner. At least Fletcher had allowed her to bring a small bundle of belongings, though he'd searched it thoroughly before handing it over. Sophia paced the confines of her cage, mind racing with possibilities, each more desperate than the last. Her father, beaten and broken, had been left behind at their ranch. Would he even survive until Will returned with the money, if he returned at all? The thought of William Zachary brought a confusing mix of emotions. They'd exchanged pleasantries at church socials and town meetings, but never anything more intimate than polite conversation. Yet he'd offered to pay a tremendous sum, possibly even his life, for her freedom. The door opened, startling Sophia from her thoughts. Silas Morgan himself entered, his expensive suit and gold pocket watch speaking of wealth that seemed obscene in a town where most families struggled to put food on the table. Miss Adams, he said, removing his hat to reveal silver-streaked dark hair. I trust your accommodations are satisfactory. As satisfactory as a prison cell can be, Sophia replied stiffly. Morgan smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. You misunderstand your situation. This isn't imprisonment, it's collateral. Your father owes me a considerable sum. A sum he couldn't possibly have borrowed, Sophia countered. Our ranch isn't worth half that amount. The cards weren't kind to him, Morgan said with a shrug, and the whiskey made him generous with his wagers. But that's not why I'm here. He approached, too close for comfort. I've come to offer you a proposition. Sophia stepped back until she felt the wall behind her. What kind of proposition? Marry me, Morgan said simply. Become my wife and I'll forgive your father's debt entirely. Shock rendered Sophia momentarily speechless. Morgan was nearly 50, more than twice her age, and rumors of his cruelty to women were well known throughout the territory. I couldn't possibly. Consider your options carefully, Miss Adams, Morgan interrupted. Marriage to me would mean comfort, security, and status. The alternative is far less pleasant. Mr. Zachary promised to pay the debt, Sophia reminded him, clinging to this hope. Morgan's laugh was cold. Zachary doesn't have that kind of money liquid. Oh, his ranch is worth 10 times that amount, but cash. No one in this territory keeps $5,000 readily available. He stepped closer, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. Sophia flinched, but had nowhere to retreat. He'll have to sell part of his land to raise it, Morgan continued. Land he's refused to sell me for years. By offering to save you, he's finally given me the leverage I need. Understanding dawned. This was never about my father's debt. You manipulated everything to force Mr. Zachary to sell. Morgan's smile widened. Smart girl. Your father does owe me, though not quite as much as the papers show. But business is business. I've wanted Zachary's water rights for years, and he's stubbornly refused every offer. You're despicable, Sophia whispered. I'm a businessman, Morgan corrected. Think about my offer. Marriage to me or whatever fate awaits you when Zachary fails to produce the money. With that, he replaced his hat and left, the lock clicking ominously behind him. Sophia sank onto the narrow bed, the full weight of her situation crushing down upon her. Her fate balanced between two impossible choices: marriage to a monster, or being sold to an uncertain but surely terrible future. And somewhere in between was William Zachary, a man willing to sacrifice everything for her, a man she was beginning to realize she knew nothing about. Well, Zachary rode through the night, pushing his stallion harder than he ever had before. By dawn, he reached the ranch he'd built from nothing over the past 6 years. The main house stood proud against the rising sun, its sturdy log construction a testament to Will's determination and hard work. His foreman, Jacob Turner, met him at the corral, concern etching lines into his weathered face. You look like hell, boss, Jacob said, taking the reins of Will's exhausted mount. What happened in town? Will dismounted, his muscles protesting after the hard ride. Morgan's finally played his hand. He's holding Sophia Adams hostage against a debt her father supposedly owes. Jacob's bushy eyebrows shot up. Thomas Adams. That old drunk couldn't scrape together enough credit to buy a new saddle, let alone anything worth kidnapping his daughter over. It's not about Adams, Will explained, heading toward the house. Jacob followed, leading the horse to the stables. It's about me. Morgan wants my land, specifically the northeast section with the spring-fed creek. The best grazing land in the county, Jacob nodded. But what's that got to do with the Adams girl? Will paused at his front door. I have 3 days to come up with $5,000 or Morgan sends her to Mexico. Jacob whistled low. That's a steep price. For land worth 3 times that amount, Morgan knows exactly what he's doing. Will pushed open the door, his mind racing with calculations. I need coffee, paper, and a clear head. Then I'm riding to the bank in Tucson. While Jacob prepared coffee, Will pulled out his account ledgers. Most of his money was tied up in cattle and improvements to the ranch. The cash he had on hand wouldn't come close to the sum needed. Jacob placed a steaming cup beside him. What are you planning, boss? Will looked up, determination hardening his features. I'm going to get a loan against next season's cattle drive. The bank in Tucson knows my reputation. They'll advance the money. And if they won't, Will stared into the dark liquid in his cup. Then I sell the northeast section to Morgan. Jacob shook his head. That land's been your dream since you came to Arizona territory. Without that water source, I know what it means. Will cut him off. But I won't let Sophia Adams pay for her father's mistakes or become a pawn in Morgan's schemes. Jacob studied his employer carefully. This seems like an awful big sacrifice for someone you barely know. Will's jaw tightened. He'd asked himself the same question during the long ride home. Why risk everything for Sophia Adams? The answer wasn't simple, but it was clear in his mind. I watched my sister Rebecca get taken by men like Morgan back in Texas, Will said quietly. I was 15, too young and weak to stop it. I promised myself I'd never stand by and let that happen to anyone else if I could prevent it. Understanding dawned on Jacob's face. What happened to your sister? We never found her. Will's voice was flat with old pain. But I won't let that be Sophia's fate. Not while I have breath in my body and means to prevent it. The older man nodded slowly. Well then, I reckon we'd better get you to Tucson fast. Take my bay gelding, he's fresher than your stallion. I'll leave within the hour, Will confirmed, rising to his feet. If I push hard, I can make Tucson by nightfall, do my business in the morning, and be back here the following night. That leaves me one day to get the money to Morgan. As Will gathered what he needed for the journey, his thoughts turned to Sophia. Her warm smile at church gatherings, the determined set of her shoulders as she managed her father's failing ranch alone, the intelligence in her hazel eyes. He'd noticed her. Of course any man with eyes would, but propriety and his own past had kept him from pursuing any acquaintance deeper than polite greetings. Now, her life depended on him. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders as he mounted Jacob's bay and pointed the horse toward Tucson. Behind him, the sun climbed higher over his ranch, the land he might have to sacrifice to save a woman he barely knew, yet couldn't bear to abandon. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the sunlight streaming through the small window of Sophia's room. She had barely slept, her mind churning with worry and fear. The sound of the key turning in the lock made her sit up straight on the bed, smoothing her rumpled dress as best she could. A young woman entered carrying a tray with bread, cheese, and coffee. Behind her came Fletcher, his calculating gaze taking in Sophia's disheveled appearance. Mr. Morgan sends his regards, Fletcher said as the serving girl placed the tray on the small table. He also requests the pleasure of your company for dinner this evening. Sophia lifted her chin. Please inform Mr. Morgan that I must decline. Fletcher's smile didn't reach his eyes. It wasn't an invitation, Miss Adams. It was an instruction. You'll join him at 7 o'clock. Sarah here will help you prepare. He gestured to the serving girl, who kept her eyes downcast. When Fletcher left, Sarah finally looked up. She was perhaps 19, with auburn hair and a sprinkling of freckles across her nose. I've brought water for washing, she said softly. And Mr. Morgan said to tell you there's a dress in the wardrobe that should fit. Sophia crossed to the small wardrobe and opened it to find an elegant emerald green gown that looked expensive and new. He expected me, she realized aloud. Sarah busied herself with pouring water into the wash basin. Mr. Morgan always gets what he wants, miss, one way or another. Has he done this before, held women here? Sarah hesitated, then nodded. A few times. Some agreed to his terms, others. She trailed off, her meaning clear. And what happened to those who refused him? The girl shrugged. I wouldn't know, miss. They weren't here long enough to tell. A chill ran down Sophia's spine. Tell me, Sarah, do you know William Zachary? At this, Sarah's expression brightened slightly. Everyone knows Mr. Zachary. He's a good man, fair with his workers, kind to those in need. They say he once rode through a blizzard to bring medicine to the Wilsons' baby when no one else would risk the journey. Sophia felt a flutter of hope. Do you think he'll come back with the money? Sarah gathered the used breakfast dishes onto the tray. If anyone would, it'd be him, but $5,000. She shook her head. That's more money than most see in a lifetime out here. After Sarah left, Sophia paced the small room, her mind working furiously. Morgan wanted Will's land, had engineered this entire situation to force him to sell. If she married Morgan, would he truly forgive her father's debt? And what of Will? Would he still be forced to sell his precious water rights? She moved to the window, pressing her face against the glass to see the bustling main street below. Her prison might be comfortable, but it was a prison nonetheless. Somewhere out there, Will Zachary was trying to save her, a near stranger, at potentially ruinous cost to himself. The thought warmed something inside her, even as it filled her with guilt. She couldn't allow him to sacrifice everything. There had to be another way. By the time Sarah returned to help her dress for dinner, Sophia had made a decision. She would meet with Morgan, learn exactly what game he was playing, and find some way to turn it to her advantage. Her father hadn't raised her to be helpless, even if his weakness had landed her in this predicament. The green dress fit perfectly, its cut more fashionable than anything Sophia had ever owned. Sarah arranged her honey blonde hair in an elegant style, securing it with pins topped with small emerald-colored stones that matched the dress. "You look beautiful, miss," Sarah said, stepping back to admire her work. Sophia studied her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. The woman who looked back at her seemed like a stranger, sophisticated, elegant, and far removed from the hard-working rancher's daughter she truly was. "Perfect," said a voice from the doorway. Fletcher stood watching, an approving look on his face. "Mr. Morgan will be pleased." Sophia squared her shoulders. "Then let's not keep him waiting." Fletcher escorted her downstairs to a private dining room behind the saloon. The contrast between the raucous main room and this elegant space was striking. A table set with fine china and crystal gleamed in the light of a chandelier. Silas Morgan rose from his seat as she entered, his eyes appreciatively taking in her appearance. "Miss Adams," he said, coming around to pull out her chair. "You look exquisite." "Mr. Morgan," Sophia acknowledged coolly, allowing him to seat her. "You've gone to considerable trouble." "Nothing is too much trouble when entertaining a beautiful woman," Morgan replied, returning to his own seat. A server immediately appeared with wine, pouring generously into both their glasses. "I don't drink wine," Sophia said. Morgan smiled. "Tonight you might make an exception." "A toast to new beginnings." Sophia left her glass untouched. "I prefer clarity of thought, Mr. Morgan, especially when discussing business." "Business?" Morgan raised an eyebrow. "I had hoped for a more pleasant conversation over dinner." "I think we both know why I'm here," Sophia replied steadily. "You want William Zachary's land, and you're using me to get it. My father's debt is merely a convenient excuse." Morgan studied her for a long moment before chuckling. "Direct and intelligent. I admire that in a woman." He sipped his wine. "Very well, let's discuss business. Yes, I want Zachary's water rights. I've offered to buy that land for years at fair market value, but he's refused every time." "Because that water makes his ranch viable," Sophia pointed out. "Without it, his cattle couldn't survive the summer months." "Precisely why it's valuable to me as well," Morgan agreed. "My investments in mining operations require water, a lot of it. Zachary controls the most reliable source in the county." The server returned with plates of roast beef, potatoes, and vegetables. Sophia waited until they were alone again before speaking. "What exactly do you want from me, Mr. Morgan? If this is about forcing Mr. Zachary to sell, why offer to marry me?" Morgan cut into his meat with precision. "Because I'm a practical man, Miss Adams. Zachary may or may not return with the money. If he does, I get what I want. If he doesn't—" He shrugged. "I still need a wife. Someone young enough to bear children, educated enough to be presentable in society, and strong enough to survive in this territory." "And if I refuse," Morgan's eyes hardened, "then I lose nothing. Your father's debt, inflated though it may be, remains unpaid. I collect by other means." Sophia forced herself to eat a few bites, mind racing. "What if I could convince Mr. Zachary to sell you the water rights directly?" Would you release me and forgive my father's actual debt, not the inflated figure? Interest flickered in Morgan's eyes. You believe you have that kind of influence over Zachary? I believe in offering solutions that benefit all parties, Sophia countered. You get the water rights you want. Mr. Zachary receives fair compensation without being forced into a distressed sale. My father and I are released from our obligation. Morgan leaned back, studying her with new appreciation. You're more cunning than I gave you credit for, Miss Adams. But why would Zachary listen to you? Because he's a reasonable man, Sophia said, hoping her voice conveyed more confidence than she felt. And because I'll make him understand it's the best option for everyone. Including yourself, Morgan noted. Very well. If you can convince Zachary to sell me the northeast section of his ranch at my last offered price $3,000, I'll consider your father's debt paid in full. $5,000, Sophia countered. You claimed that was the debt. The land is worth at least that much. $4,000, Morgan responded, and not a penny more. Sophia nodded slowly. $4,000 then, but I want the agreement in writing, witnessed and legal. Morgan's smile widened. My dear Miss Adams, I believe I underestimated you. Very well. If Zachary agrees to sell me that land for $4,000 upon his return, your debt is cleared. You'll have my written guarantee. They finished the meal discussing details, Sophia careful to keep Morgan talking while revealing little about herself. When dinner concluded, Fletcher escorted her back to her room. Alone again, Sophia sank onto the bed, her composed facade crumbling. She had bought herself an alternative, but at what cost? While Zachary would still lose his precious water rights, the difference was merely in how the transaction occurred. Yet what choice did she have? Will might not return with the money at all, and if he did, he'd likely have to sell the land anyway to raise it. At least this way, her father's debt would be cleared without Will having to pay money he couldn't afford. As she changed out of the beautiful green dress, Sophia wondered what Will would think of her bargain. Would he see it as a betrayal or understand she was trying to protect him too? The thought of facing him with this proposal made her stomach tighten with anxiety. But beneath that anxiety lay a deeper concern, one she was reluctant to acknowledge even to herself. In the short time since Will had intervened on her behalf, something had shifted in how she thought of him. His willingness to help her at such great personal cost had touched her in ways she hadn't expected. Sleep eluded Sophia that night as she wrestled with her conscience, the memory of Will's determined blue eyes haunting her dreams when exhaustion finally claimed her. The Tucson First National Bank was an imposing building of red brick and stone, designed to project stability and permanence in a territory where both were often in short supply. Will straightened his jacket and adjusted his hat before climbing the steps to the entrance. Inside, the marble floors and polished wood spoke of Eastern prosperity transplanted to the Arizona desert. I'd like to speak with Mr. Harrington, Will told the teller, passing across his card. A few minutes later, he was shown into a well-appointed office where Gerald Harrington, the bank manager, greeted him with a firm handshake. Mr. Zachary, what brings you all the way to Tucson? Nothing wrong with your operation, I hope. Not with my operation, no, Will replied, taking the offered seat. But I find myself in need of immediate capital. $5,000 to be exact. Harrington's eyebrows rose. That's a substantial sum to raise quickly. May I ask the purpose? Will considered how much to reveal. Let's just say it's to prevent a grave injustice. The banker leaned back in his chair. I see. And what collateral are you prepared to offer? My next cattle drive is scheduled in 4 months. 2,000 head, conservatively valued at $40 each. I'm prepared to sign over 20% of the proceeds against a loan of $5,000. Harrington frowned. That's rather speculative, Mr. Zachary. Cattle prices fluctuate, and there are always risks with drives. The bank prefers more tangible assets. My ranch is valued at over $15,000, Will countered. I'd offer a portion as collateral, but I need the funds immediately today if possible. The banker studied Will's face. This sounds rather urgent for a business transaction. It is urgent, Will admitted. A young woman's freedom, possibly her life, depends on it. Understanding dawned on Harrington's face. Ah, a matter of honor, then. You could say that. Harrington stood, moving to look out the window at the busy Tucson street. The bank's loan committee doesn't meet until next week. Even with my recommendation, I couldn't authorize such a sum without their approval. Will's heart sank. I don't have a week. I barely have 2 days. However, the banker continued, turning back to face Will, I might have an alternative solution. Are you familiar with Harrison Reynolds? The mining investor. By reputation only. He's in town, staying at the Grand Hotel. Reynolds is always looking for investment opportunities, particularly in established operations with growth potential. Harrington returned to his desk. I could arrange an introduction this afternoon. Will considered the option. Private investors typically demanded higher interest rates than banks, but they could also move more quickly. I'd appreciate that, he said finally. Though I should be clear, I'm not looking to sell any part of my ranch. This is strictly a loan against future earnings. Harrington nodded. I'll send a message to Reynolds immediately. In the meantime, I'll have my clerk prepare some documents outlining your operations' financials. Reynolds will want to see evidence of your ranch's profitability. By mid-afternoon, Will found himself in the plush lobby of the Grand Hotel, reviewing figures with Harrison Reynolds, a barrel-chested man with a neatly trimmed white beard and shrewd eyes. Your operation looks solid, Reynolds acknowledged, scanning the documents. Harrington speaks highly of you and his judgment is usually sound. But $5,000 with no real collateral except future cattle sales. He shook his head. That's a significant risk. Will leaned forward. Mr. Reynolds, I've never defaulted on a loan. My word is my bond. In business, Mr. Zachary, sentiment has little value. Reynolds tapped the papers. However, I am intrigued by your water rights. That spring-fed creek on your northeast border is a valuable asset in this territory. Will tensed. The water rights aren't for sale. I'm not suggesting purchasing them outright, Reynolds clarified. But as collateral, that might justify the risk. If I default, you get my water rights, Will summarized, frowning. Precisely. But you've just assured me you never default on loans, so the risk is minimal for you. Reynolds smiled. For me, it's insurance against a significant unsecured loan. Will weighed his options. Without that water source, his ranch would struggle during the dry months. But without the money, Sophia would be lost. I'll need the full amount in cash today, Will said. And 6 months to repay after my cattle drive. Reynolds considered this. 5 months at 15% interest. The water rights transfer to me automatically if you fail to repay in full by the deadline. The terms were steep, but Will had no choice. Draw up the papers. I'll sign them immediately. Within 2 hours, the agreement was signed and witnessed. Will left the Grand Hotel with a heavy leather satchel containing $5,000 in mixed bills and gold coins, and the weight of a potentially ruinous obligation. He purchased supplies for the return journey and set out immediately, pushing his borrowed horse as hard as he dared. As the sun set behind him, Will calculated the distances and times. If he rode through the night, stopping only to rest his mount, he could be back at his ranch by mid-morning. From there, it would be a hard ride to Silver Creek, arriving before Morgan's deadline with just hours to spare. The stallion's steady rhythm beneath him matched the pounding of his heart as Will thought of Sophia. Was she safe? Had Morgan treated her decently? The questions tormented him as the miles passed beneath his horse's hooves. His thoughts drifted to the few times he'd spoken with Sophia Adams at church socials or town gatherings. She wasn't like the giggling girls who sometimes tried to catch his attention. There was a seriousness to her, a determined practicality born from years of managing her father's failing ranch. Yet he'd seen her kindness too, teaching reading to the blacksmith's children, organizing food for families hit by illness or hardship. Will had noticed her, certainly. What man wouldn't? But his focus on building his ranch and the shadows of his past had kept him from pursuing any deeper acquaintance. Now, racing against time to save her, Will wondered if he'd been denying himself happiness out of fear. If they both survived this ordeal, perhaps it was time to change that. The night grew cold as Will pushed onward, the precious satchel secured inside his jacket. He would reach Silver Creek in time. He had to, for Sophia's sake and perhaps for his own. On the third day of her captivity, Sophia woke to the sound of raised voices outside her door. Quickly dressing, she pressed her ear against the wood, straining to make out the words. "Ridden out at dawn," came Fletcher's voice. "Said he had business in the hills." "Convenient timing," replied another man, one of Morgan's guards. "You think he's avoiding Zachary?" "Morgan doesn't avoid anyone," Fletcher scoffed. "More likely he's making sure certain arrangements are in place, depending on how today plays out." Their footsteps moved away, leaving Sophia with a cold sense of dread. Morgan had left town on the very day Will was due to return with the money. That couldn't be coincidence. Sarah arrived with breakfast, her expression troubled. "What's happening?" Sophia asked immediately. "Why has Mr. Morgan left town today of all days?" Sarah glanced nervously at the door. "I shouldn't say anything, miss. Please," Sophia urged. "My life depends on understanding what's happening." The girl hesitated, then leaned closer. "I overheard Mr. Morgan talking with Fletcher last night. They've sent men to intercept Mr. Zachary on his return journey. They don't intend for him to reach town with the money." Horror washed over Sophia. "They're going to rob him, or worse." Sarah nodded miserably. "Mr. Morgan never intended to honor the agreement. With Mr. Zachary dead or missing and proof that he failed to pay your father's debt, he gets everything he wants you, the water rights, everything." Sophia's mind raced. "I need to warn him somehow. When did Morgan's men leave?" "At first light. They're watching the main road from Tucson." "And you're sure that's where Mr. Zachary went, to Tucson?" Sarah nodded. "That's what Fletcher said. It's the only place with a bank large enough to raise that kind of money." Sophia moved to the window, her hands shaking as she peered out at the street below. If Morgan's men were watching the main road, Will would ride straight into an ambush. "I need to get out of here," she said, turning back to Sarah. "Can you help me?" Fear crossed the girl's face. "Miss, if I get caught, I know I'm asking a lot," Sophia acknowledged. "But a man's life is at stake, a good man who's risking everything to help me. Please." Sarah wavered, then seemed to make a decision. "The delivery entrance at the back of the kitchen. The cook steps out for his morning smoke at 10 o'clock sharp. I could create a distraction, maybe spill something that needs cleaning up. The guard at your door would have to help." Hope surged in Sophia's chest. "And then, the stables are just behind the saloon if you could take a horse." "I can ride better than most men in this territory," Sophia assured her. "My father taught me on our ranch," Sarah nodded. "I'll come for you at 5 minutes before 10. Be ready." After Sarah left, Sophia quickly changed from the dress Morgan had provided back into her own simpler clothing. It would be easier to ride in her worn skirt, and the fine green dress would be too conspicuous for an escape. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sophia packed her few belongings, then sat by the window watching the town's normal morning activities, her mind filled with images of Will riding into danger, unaware of the trap. What if Sarah changed her mind? What if the plan failed? What if she escaped but couldn't find Will in time? At precisely 5 minutes before 10, the lock turned. Sarah slipped in, her face pale but determined. "Are you ready?" she whispered. Sophia nodded, gathering her small bundle. "Follow me and stay quiet," Sarah instructed. "When we reach the kitchen, wait behind the flour barrels until I create the distraction. Then slip out the back door." They moved silently through the corridor. Sophia's guard was seated at the top of the stairs, but his attention was focused on a card game with another of Morgan's men. Sarah led her down a narrow back staircase that creaked alarmingly with each step. The kitchen was hot and busy, with the cook shouting orders at a young boy peeling potatoes. Sarah positioned Sophia behind large barrels of flour near the back door, then moved to a shelf stacked with plates. With deliberate clumsiness, Sarah reached for a stack of dishes and sent them crashing to the floor. The resulting commotion was even more effective than planned. The cook bellowed in anger, the kitchen boy dropped his knife, and upstairs the guards shouted questions. "I'm so sorry," Sarah wailed dramatically. "Oh, it's everywhere. I need help." As the kitchen erupted into chaos, Sophia slipped out the back door into the alley behind the saloon. The morning sun momentarily blinded her after days in the dimly lit room, but she didn't pause. The stables stood just yards away, their doors open as a stable boy swept the entrance, moving as casually as she dared. Sophia approached the nearest stall where a saddled bay mare stood waiting, likely for a customer at the saloon. With practiced ease, she checked the cinch, then led the horse out the back of the stables. Only when she was a safe distance from town did Sophia mount, turning the mare toward the main road to Tucson. If Will had gone there for the money, as Sarah believed, he would be returning along this route straight into Morgan's trap. Sophia knew these hills. Growing up on a ranch had taught her every trail and washout within 20 miles of Silver Creek. The main road curved around the base of Copper Ridge, but there was a cattle trail that cut through the hills. If she could intercept Will there, she might save him from Morgan's ambush. She urged the mare into a gallop, praying she wasn't already too late. Will Zachary reached his ranch just as the sun climbed toward its midday position. He'd pushed himself and his borrowed mount to their limits, riding through the night with only brief stops to rest the horse. Jacob met him at the corral, concern written across his weathered features. "You look half dead, boss." "No time to rest," Will replied, dismounting stiffly. His muscles protested after so many hours in the saddle. "I need my stallion saddled, the freshest one we've got." "You got the money?" Jacob asked, already moving toward the stables. Will patted the satchel secured beneath his jacket. "Every dollar. But Morgan's deadline is sunset today. I need to get to Silver Creek." While Jacob prepared a fresh mount, Will quickly washed the trail dust from his face and changed into clean clothes. The satchel of money never left his sight. "Take the Ridge Trail," Jacob suggested as Will prepared to depart. "It's rougher terrain but cuts nearly 2 hours off the journey, and Will," he hesitated, "be careful. Morgan's not a man to give up easily even when he loses." Will nodded grimly. "I know. If I'm not back by tomorrow, ride to the marshal in Prescott. Tell him everything." With that final instruction, Will mounted his strongest stallion and set off toward Silver Creek, the precious money secure against his chest. The Ridge Trail was indeed rougher, winding through rocky hills rather than following the easier path of the main road. But time was crucial, and Will knew these lands as well as any man. The sun climbed higher as he rode, its heat bearing down mercilessly. Will conserved his water, taking only small sips when absolutely necessary. His mind remained focused on the journey, alert for any sign of danger. Jacob's warning echoed in his thoughts. Morgan wasn't a man to accept defeat. Will had nearly reached the halfway point when he heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Instantly alert, he guided his stallion behind a large boulder, hand moving to the revolver at his hip. The rider came around the bend at speed, a woman on a bay mare, her honey blonde hair flying loose behind her. Will's heart leaped in recognition. "Sophia," he called, urging his horse forward. She pulled her mare to a skidding halt, relief flooding her features. "Will, thank God I found you." "How did you escape?" he asked, closing the distance between them. "There's no time," Sophia replied urgently. "Morgan's men are watching the main road. They plan to ambush you, take the money, and—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Will's expression hardened. "How many men?" "I don't know exactly. Sarah, the serving girl who helped me escape, said Morgan sent men at dawn. He's left town himself, supposedly on business in the hills." "Convenient," Will muttered. "Are you hurt? Did they harm you?" Sophia shook her head. "No, I'm unharmed." But Will, Morgan never intended to honor the agreement. Even with the money, he planned to keep me and claim you'd failed. Will's jaw tightened. "I suspected as much. That's why I took this trail instead of the main road." "What do we do now?" Sophia asked, her eyes searching his face. "First, we get somewhere safe," Will decided. "There's an old line shack about 3 miles from here where my men sometimes shelter during storms. We can rest there and make a plan." As they rode side by side toward the line shack, Will explained his journey to Tucson and the loan from Reynolds. Sophia listened in growing dismay. "You put your water rights at risk?" she asked when he finished. "Will, without that creek, my cattle would suffer during drought years," Will acknowledged. "But I'd find a way to manage. The alternative wasn't acceptable." Sophia fell silent, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his sacrifice. When she finally spoke again, her voice was soft. "Why would you do that for me? We barely know each other." Will glanced at her, then returned his gaze to the trail ahead. "I know enough. I know you've kept your father's ranch running despite impossible odds. I know you teach the blacksmith's children to read every Sunday after church. I know you organized help when the millers lost their crop to hail last summer." Surprise colored Sophia's features. "You noticed all that?" A slight smile touched Will's lips. "I notice more than people think, Miss Adams." They reached the line shack shortly after, a simple one-room structure built of logs with a small corral for horses. Inside was basic but clean, with a narrow cot, table, 2 chairs, and a small stove. "It's not much," Will apologized, striking a match to light the lantern. "But it's defensible and unknown to most folks outside my ranch hands." Sophia sank gratefully onto one of the chairs. "It's perfect. I haven't properly rested in days." We'll set the satchel of money on the table, then check their supplies. There should be some coffee and beans in the cupboard, maybe jerky too if the mice haven't found it. As he prepared a simple meal, Sophia watched him move about the small space with efficient grace. This was a different side of the successful rancher she'd glimpsed from afar: practical, resourceful, and surprisingly domestic. "Morgan offered to marry me," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. Will's hand stilled over the coffee pot. "What did you say?" "I refused, of course," Sophia continued, "but he made me realize something. This was never about my father's debt. Morgan inflated the amount to force your hand." "I figured as much," Will acknowledged, returning to his task. "Morgan's been after my water rights for years." "Your situation gave him leverage he hadn't had before." "I made a counter-offer," Sophia admitted, studying her hands. "I told him if I could convince you to sell the water rights directly for $4,000, he'd consider my father's debt paid in full." Will turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "And did you intend to try convincing me?" I thought. Sophia faltered. "I thought it might be better than you paying 5,000 for my freedom only to lose the land anyway. At least this way you'd keep some of your money." To her surprise, Will chuckled. "You were trying to protect me." "It wasn't funny," Sophia protested. "I was trapped and desperate and thinking of others even in that situation," Will finished for her, his voice softening. "That's remarkable, Sophia." The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Then you're not angry. How could I be?" Will set 2 cups of coffee on the table, then took the seat opposite her. "But it's irrelevant now. You're free, I have the money, and Morgan's plans have failed." "Not entirely," Sophia pointed out. "He still has my father, and we can't return to Silver Creek without risking an ambush." Will nodded thoughtfully. "We need the law on our side. The territorial marshal has been looking for reasons to investigate Morgan for months. This might be the opportunity he's been waiting for." "Prescott is at least a day's ride from here," Sophia said. "By the time we return with the marshal, who knows what Morgan might do?" "We don't both need to go," Will replied. "I can take you to my ranch where you'll be safe with Jacob and the boys. Then I'll ride to Prescott for the marshal." Sophia straightened in her chair. "No, my father is still in danger because of Morgan's schemes. I won't hide while others risk themselves to help me." Will studied her determined expression. "What do you suggest?" "We need proof of Morgan's criminal activities," Sophia said slowly. "Something the marshal can't ignore." "The falsified loan documents," Will suggested. "Morgan showed them to me when I confronted him about your father's supposed debt. If we could get our hands on those papers." "They'd likely be in his office at the saloon," Sophia mused. "But how would we get to them? Morgan's men will be watching for both of us." They fell silent, considering the problem. Outside, the day was advancing toward afternoon, shadows lengthening as the sun continued its westward journey. "What if we used Morgan's own plan against him?" Will said suddenly. "He expected me to arrive with the money by sunset today. What if I did exactly that but on my terms?" Interest sparked in Sophia's eyes. "What are you thinking?" "Morgan doesn't know you've escaped," Will explained, warming to his idea. "He expects me to arrive alone, probably exhausted from the journey, an easy target for whatever he's planned." But instead, a slow smile spread across Will's face. "Instead, I arrive with a witness you and evidence of his criminal conspiracy. If we can get those loan documents, along with your testimony about his attempt to force you into marriage, the marshal will have more than enough to arrest him." Sophia considered the plan. "It's risky. Morgan's men are everywhere in town." "Risk is better than certainty," Will countered. "If we do nothing or flee to the marshal, Morgan will claim innocence, destroy the evidence, and possibly harm your father before we return." As they discussed the details, refining the plan and identifying its weaknesses, Sophia found herself drawing strength from Will's steady confidence. Despite the danger ahead, she felt safer than she had in days. When they finished their simple meal and prepared to leave, Sophia placed her hand on Will's arm. "Thank you," she said simply. "Not just for the money or the rescue, but for believing in me, for treating me as a partner in this, not someone to be protected and sheltered." Will covered her hand with his own. "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, Sophia Adams. I'd be a fool not to recognize that." Their eyes held for a long moment, unspoken feelings passing between them. Then Will cleared his throat and stepped back. "We should go if we want to reach Silver Creek by sunset," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. As they mounted their horses and set off toward town, Sophia realized something had fundamentally shifted between them. Whatever happened at Silver Creek, she and Will Zachary would never again be mere acquaintances. The thought both terrified and exhilarated her. Silver Creek appeared quiet in the golden light of late afternoon. Will and Sophia approached from the hills behind the town, avoiding the main road where Morgan's men might be watching. They left their horses concealed in a stand of cottonwoods near the creek that gave the town its name. "Remember the plan," Will said as they prepared for the final phase. "We slip in through the back of the saloon during the busy pre-dinner rush. Most of the workers will be focused on the main room." Sophia nodded, tucking her hair beneath a hat Will had provided from the lined shack. With her father's old jacket draped over her shoulders, she might pass for a young man at a distance enough to avoid immediate recognition. "Morgan's office is at the end of the corridor behind the bar," she confirmed. "Sarah showed me the layout when she helped me escape." The loan documents would likely be in his desk or the safe. "If they're in the safe, we have a problem," Will admitted. "But let's hope for the easier solution first." They made their way carefully through the scattered buildings at the edge of town. A distant church bell struck 5 o'clock 1 hour until Morgan's sunset deadline. The saloon would be filling with miners and cowboys ending their workday. As predicted, the delivery entrance behind the saloon was unguarded, the kitchen busy with preparation for the evening meals. Will and Sophia slipped inside during a moment when the cook's back was turned, ducking behind stacks of supplies. A surprised gasp made them both turn. Sarah stood frozen, a tray of clean glasses in her hands. "Miss Adams," she whispered, eyes wide, "they've been searching everywhere for you." "Sarah," Sophia acknowledged with relief, "we need your help one more time." Quickly, Sophia explained their plan. Sarah's face paled at the danger, but she nodded resolutely. "Mr. Morgan's not back yet, but Fletcher's been in and out of the office all day," she informed them. "He steps out to check the bar every half hour or so." "Can you create another distraction?" Will asked. "Something to draw attention away from the corridor." Sarah considered this. "The evening meal rush is about to start. I could drop a tray near the front of the bar. That would draw everyone's attention, including Fletcher if he's there." "Perfect," Will agreed. "We'll wait for your signal." Sarah left with her tray of glasses, and Will and Sophia moved carefully to the corridor leading to Morgan's office. They concealed themselves in a small storage closet, leaving the door cracked to watch for Fletcher. Pressed close together in the darkness, Sophia was acutely aware of Will's presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body beside hers. Despite the danger, she felt an inexplicable sense of rightness. "Will," she whispered, "if something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong," he interrupted gently. "But if it does," she persisted, "I want you to know that a tremendous crash from the main room interrupted her." Glasses shattered, men shouted, and Sarah's apologetic voice rose above the commotion. "Now," Will said, taking Sophia's hand. They slipped from the closet and moved swiftly down the corridor. Morgan's office door was locked, but Will produced a thin metal tool from his pocket. "Jacob taught me a few tricks from his less respectable days," he explained, working the lock. After a tense moment, it clicked open. Inside, the office was expensively furnished with a large oak desk, leather chairs, and bookshelves filled with ledgers. A painting of a hunting scene hung conspicuously on one wall, likely concealing a safe. Sophia thought. "Check the desk," Will instructed, moving to examine the drawers. Sophia rounded the desk, pulling open each drawer systematically. In the bottom right, she found a stack of papers secured with a leather cord. "Here," she said, quickly untying the bundle. "Loan agreements, all with my father's signature." Will joined her, examining the documents. "These are forgeries." "Good ones, but I've seen your father's signature on cattle bills of sale. This isn't it." "And look at the amounts," Sophia pointed out. $500 originally with impossible interest terms. No wonder the debt supposedly grew to $5,000. A noise in the corridor froze them both. Footsteps approached, then stopped outside the door. The handle turned. Will quickly pulled Sophia behind the door as it swung open. Fletcher entered, muttering about clumsy serving girls as he crossed to the desk. When he saw the open drawers and scattered papers, he reached for his gun. Will moved with lightning speed, pressing the barrel of his revolver against Fletcher's back. "I wouldn't," he advised quietly. Fletcher stiffened. "Zachary, you're supposed to be dead." "Your men at the ambush will be disappointed," Will replied. "Hands on the desk where I can see them." Sophia emerged from behind the door, the loan documents clutched in her hand. "We have proof of Morgan's fraud, Fletcher. Forged loan agreements, inflated debts, conspiracy to commit kidnapping." Fletcher's eyes widened at the sight of her. "How did you? Where's my father?" Sophia demanded, cutting him off. "At your ranch, last I heard," Fletcher answered, his confidence visibly faltering. "Morgan sent men to watch him, make sure he didn't cause trouble." Will removed Fletcher's gun, tucking it into his own belt. "And Morgan himself, where is he now?" A slow smile spread across Fletcher's face. "Closer than you think, Zachary." The office door swung wider, revealing Silas Morgan himself, a shotgun leveled at Will's chest. Behind him stood two armed men. "Mr. Zachary," Morgan said smoothly. "Right on schedule, though not quite where I expected you. And Miss Adams, what a pleasant surprise. I was quite concerned when you disappeared this morning." Will kept his revolver trained on Fletcher but shifted slightly to place himself between Sophia and Morgan. "We have the proof of your crimes, Morgan," he said evenly. "Forged loan documents, witness testimony about your kidnapping plot. The territorial marshal will be very interested." Morgan's smile didn't falter. "Documents can be destroyed. Witnesses can disappear. Out here, the law is only as strong as the men enforcing it, and I own most of those men." "Not all of them," came a new voice from the doorway behind Morgan. All heads turned to see Sheriff Tate standing with his deputy, both with weapons drawn. "That's enough, Silas," the sheriff said. "Lower the shotgun." Morgan's expression hardened. "This doesn't concern you, Tate. Kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy in my jurisdiction. That very much concerns me." Tate's voice was firm. "Now lower your weapon before this gets uglier than it already is." For a tense moment, Morgan seemed to consider his options. Then, with deliberate slowness, he lowered the shotgun. "This is a simple business dispute," he tried. "A misunderstanding about a debt owed by Thomas Adams." Sophia held up the documents. "A debt fabricated through forgery and extortion." "We have proof, Sheriff. And witnesses," added a quiet voice. Sarah stood behind the sheriff, her chin raised despite her obvious fear. "I can testify to what Mr. Morgan planned to do with Miss Adams if Mr. Zachary failed to pay." Morgan's face flushed with anger. "You treacherous little—" "That's enough," Tate interrupted. "Deputy, take their weapons and escort Mr. Morgan and his men to the jail. I'll be along shortly to sort this out properly." As the deputy disarmed the men and led them away, Tate turned to Will and Sophia. "I received an interesting telegram from the marshal in Prescott this morning. Seems someone's been investigating Morgan's business practices for months. When your foreman rode into Prescott with your story, Will, the marshal connected the dots." Will's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Jacob went to Prescott. When?" "Yesterday, apparently," Tate replied. "Said he had a bad feeling about Morgan's offer and wasn't about to let you ride into a trap alone." Relief washed over Will. Good old Jacob, always watching his back. "What about my father?" Sophia asked anxiously. "Fletcher said Morgan sent men to watch him." "The marshal dispatched deputies to your ranch this morning," Tate assured her. "Your father is safe. though I hear he's in rough shape from Morgan's initial beating." Sophia sagged against the desk, the tension of the past days finally catching up with her. Will moved to her side, his hand steadying her elbow. "It's over," he said softly. "You're safe now." Tate collected the forged documents as evidence, then escorted them from the saloon. Outside, the setting sun painted the town in shades of gold and crimson. "The marshal will arrive tomorrow to take Morgan to Prescott for trial," Tate informed them. "In the meantime, I suggest you both get some rest. It's been a long few days." Will nodded his thanks to the sheriff, then turned to Sophia. "I'll take you to your father. He must be worried sick." As they retrieved their horses and rode toward the Adams ranch, Sophia found herself struggling with a mixture of exhaustion and elation. The nightmare was over, yet something else was just beginning, something both thrilling and terrifying in its newness. The small ranch house came into view as twilight descended. A light burned in the window, and the door opened at the sound of approaching horses. Thomas Adams stood in the doorway, his face bruised but his eyes lighting up at the sight of his daughter. "Sophia," he called, his voice breaking. "Thank God." Sophia dismounted and ran to her father, embracing him carefully to avoid aggravating his injuries. "Papa, are you all right?" "Better now," he replied, holding her tight. His eyes met Will's over her shoulder. "Mr. Zachary, I owe you a debt I can never repay," Will dismounted, approaching the pair. "You owe me nothing, sir. I'm just glad we're all safe." Thomas Adams stepped back, keeping an arm around his daughter. "Please, come inside. It's the least I can offer." The cabin was humble but clean, lit by oil lamps that cast a warm glow over the simple furniture. As Thomas busied himself preparing coffee, Sophia explained everything that had happened since Morgan's men had taken her. "I've been a fool," Thomas admitted when she finished. "The drinking, the gambling, I put everything at risk, including my own daughter." "Morgan preyed on your weakness," Will said. "He's done the same to others." Thomas shook his head. "That doesn't excuse my actions. But I swear to you both I'm done with that life. No more drinking, no more gambling." He looked at his daughter with remorse. "I just pray I haven't ruined everything beyond repair." Sophia took her father's hand. "The ranch is struggling, Papa, has been for years, but we'll find a way forward." "We always have." Will cleared his throat. "Actually, I might have a proposition that could help." Both Adams looked at him with interest. "My herd is growing faster than I can properly manage," Will explained. "I need experienced hands who understand cattle." "Mr. Adams, your reputation as a cattleman was once the finest in the territory before." He trailed off tactfully. Thomas nodded. "Before the drink got hold of me." "I'd like to hire you as my foreman for the South Range," Will continued. "The position comes with a good salary and use of the foreman's cabin by the creek. You'd be responsible for about 500 head. Thomas blinked in surprise. "You'd trust me with that responsibility, after everything?" "I believe in second chances," Will said simply. "And Sophia speaks highly of your skills with cattle." Thomas looked to his daughter, who nodded encouragement. "It's a generous offer," he said finally. "But what about our ranch?" Will glanced at Sophia before answering. "That would be up to you. You could sell it, or keep it and hire someone to work it while you're at my place, or perhaps—" He hesitated. "Perhaps other arrangements could be made in time." The meaning behind his words wasn't lost on Sophia, whose cheeks colored slightly. "I'll consider it seriously," Thomas promised. "And I'm grateful for the opportunity." Later, as Will prepared to leave, Sophia walked with him to where his horse waited. "You didn't have to offer my father that position," she said softly. "I meant what I said," Will replied. "Your father knows cattle. Once he's sober and healing, he'll be an asset to my operation." Sophia studied his face in the moonlight. And what did you mean by other arrangements? Will's expression grew serious. Sophia, these past few days have shown me what truly matters in life. I've spent years building my ranch, focusing on success and security. But what good is any of it without someone to share it with? He took her hand in his. I'm not proposing marriage, not yet. We both need time after everything that's happened. But I'd like the chance to court you properly, if you're willing. Sophia felt her heart flutter. I think I'd like that very much, Will Zachary. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after the darkest night. Then I'll call on you properly once things settle down. Perhaps Sunday after church, Sophia nodded, suddenly shy. Sunday would be perfect. Will mounted his stallion, tipping his hat to her. Until Sunday then, Miss Adams. As she watched him ride away, Sophia hugged herself against the evening chill. For the first time in years, the future held more promise than fear. 3 months later, the Adams ranch sold for a fair price to a young family from Kansas looking to start a new life in Arizona territory. Thomas Adams, now sober for 90 days, had proven himself an excellent foreman on Will's South Range. His knowledge of cattle breeding had already improved the quality of Will's herd. Sophia had moved into the main ranch house as a companion to Will's elderly Aunt Martha, who had come from St. Louis to supervise the proprieties during Will and Sophia's courtship. The arrangement satisfied the town gossips while allowing Sophia and Will to spend time together daily. On a perfect autumn afternoon, Will invited Sophia for a ride to his favorite spot on the ranch, a small mesa overlooking the valley, where wildflowers still bloomed despite the approaching winter. I received a letter from the bank today, Will said as they sat on a blanket, enjoying a simple picnic. Harrison Reynolds has been arrested for fraud in Tucson. Apparently, he's been involved in several dubious schemes. Sophia looked up in surprise. What does that mean for your loan? Will smiled. The new bank president reviewed the terms and found them unconscionable. They've offered to refinance at standard rates with no claim on my water rights. That's wonderful news, Sophia exclaimed. I know how worried you've been. I was more concerned about losing the land than the money, Will admitted. This ranch represents everything I've worked for. Sophia nodded in understanding. Over the past months, she'd come to appreciate just how much the Rocking Z Ranch meant to Will, not just as property, but as the culmination of a dream that had sustained him through the loss of his family and the hardships of carving a life in the territory. There's something else, Will continued, reaching into his pocket. Something I've been wanting to ask you. Sophia's heart quickened as Will withdrew a small velvet box. When I offered to pay your father's debt 3 months ago, I told Morgan I'd pay it in full with my life if necessary, Will said, his voice growing serious. I meant it then, and I mean it now. I'd give everything I have to keep you safe and happy. He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. But I'm hoping instead to share my life with you. Sophia Adams, will you marry me? Tears filled Sophia's eyes as she gazed at the man before her, strong yet gentle, determined yet kind. She'd come to know him deeply over these months of courtship, learning his dreams and fears, sharing her own in return. What had begun in crisis had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring. Yes, she whispered, her voice catching. Yes, Will, I'll marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger and drew her into his arms, Sophia knew that the debt that had nearly destroyed her had instead led her to the greatest blessing of her life. They were married that Christmas in the small church in Silver Creek, with Thomas giving away the bride and Jacob serving as best man. Sarah, now employed as the school teacher's assistant rather than a saloon girl, served as maid of honor. Silas Morgan and Fletcher had been convicted of fraud. kidnapping, and conspiracy, receiving lengthy sentences in the territorial prison. The townspeople, long intimidated by Morgan's influence, gradually reclaimed their community under Sheriff Tate's steady guidance. Thomas Adams remained Will's foreman, his renewed dedication to sobriety strengthened by his desire to be worthy of his daughter's happiness and his future grandchildren's respect. The small cabin by the creek became his home, close enough to visit the main house regularly, but far enough to give the newlyweds their privacy. 1 year to the day after Will had offered his life to save Sophia from a debt she didn't owe, they stood together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the hills in gold. "Any regrets?" Will asked, his arm around his wife's waist. Sophia leaned into his embrace, her hand resting protectively over the slight swell of her belly where their first child grew. "Only that we wasted so many years passing each other in town, exchanging nothing more than polite greetings." Will chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I think we've made up for lost time." "And then some," Sophia agreed with a smile. As darkness settled over the land, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about their plans for the future, the nursery they would prepare, the spring cattle drive, the new breeding stock arriving from Texas. Life in the Arizona Territory would never be easy. There would always be challenges, drought years and harsh winters, difficult neighbors and unexpected setbacks. But Sophia and Will faced them together, their bond forged in crisis and strengthened by choice. A debt that shouldn't have existed had brought them together. Love, steady, deliberate, and true, would keep them that way for all the years to come. 5 years later, the rocking Z Ranch had nearly doubled in size. Will's innovative breeding program had produced cattle better adapted to the Arizona climate, commanding premium prices at market. The ranch house had expanded to accommodate their growing family, 3-year-old twins Rebecca and Thomas, and infant daughter Catherine. Sophia managed the household and ranch accounts with the same efficiency she'd once applied to salvaging her father's failing property. Her vegetable garden was the envy of neighboring ranches, and her preserved fruits won ribbons at the county fair each autumn. Thomas Adams, now 7 years sober, had become Will's trusted right hand in all ranch operations. His small cabin had been expanded and improved, becoming a gathering place for Sunday dinners when weather permitted. On the anniversary of their wedding, Will and Sophia made their annual ride to the mesa where he had proposed. The December air was crisp, but not uncomfortable, the afternoon sun warming the sheltered spot where they spread their picnic blanket. "Jacob says the new stallion from Kentucky is settling in well," Will reported as they enjoyed the fried chicken and biscuits Sophia had packed. "Should improve our stock considerably next breeding season." Sophia smiled. "Always thinking ahead, aren't you?" "Someone has to," Will teased, reaching over to brush a strand of honey blonde hair from her face. At 31, Sophia was even more beautiful to him than when they'd married. Motherhood and happiness had added a depth to her beauty that took his breath away. "I've been thinking ahead too," Sophia said, her eyes twinkling. "The twins are old enough for school next fall. I'm considering teaching part-time at the new schoolhouse in town." Will looked surprised. "You want to teach, with 3 young children and the ranch to manage?" "Just 2 days a week," Sophia clarified. "Sarah's doing wonderful things with the school, but she needs help with the younger children. And I miss using that part of myself, sometimes the part that taught the blacksmith's children to read all those years ago." Understanding dawned on Will's face. "The part of you I first admired from afar," Sophia nodded. "Before debts and dangers and dramatic rescues." Will laughed, the sound echoing across the valley below. "You make our beginning sound like a dime novel adventure." "Wasn't it, though?" Sophia countered. "The innocent maiden, the noble cowboy, the villainous saloon owner." "When you put it that way," Will acknowledged, "we do have quite a story to tell the children someday." "Perhaps with some details omitted until they're older," Sophia suggested. They fell into comfortable silence, gazing out over the ranch that had become the center of their shared life. In the distance, they could see the cattle grazing peacefully, the bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived, the small schoolhouse Will had built for the children of his workers. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Morgan hadn't come after your father that day?" Will asked. "If our paths hadn't crossed the way they did?" Sophia considered the question. "I believe we would have found each other eventually, perhaps at a church social or a town meeting. It might have taken longer, been less dramatic, but I think we were meant to be together." Will pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "In that case, I almost owe Morgan a debt of gratitude for speeding things along. Almost." "I prefer to thank God rather than Silas Morgan," Sophia replied with a smile. "Though I suppose he works through unexpected channels sometimes." As the afternoon waned and they packed their picnic to return to the children waiting at home, Will helped Sophia onto her mare, his hands lingering at her waist. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Zachary," he said softly. "Every day with you is a blessing I never thought I'd have." Sophia leaned down to kiss him, her heart full of the same deep contentment that had characterized their years together. And every day ahead is another opportunity to be grateful for a debt that wasn't really owed, but was paid in the currency of love rather than dollars. Will mounted his stallion, and together they rode home through the golden light of the setting sun, toward the life they'd built from crisis and courage, sacrifice and love, a life richer than either could have imagined in those desperate days when everything began with a debt and a promise.